Would you like to be somebody who understands what the intrinsic value of criminals is, or more generally of humans is? Then listen to this entire video where I explain how we treat criminals in the wrong way in Western societies, let's say, and how we are overlooking the value that still lies within the criminals, and we are just sort of throwing them out of the window and boxing them in as outlaws, let's say. So before we get into this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, and how to reduce suffering in life. Let's get into it. Now, I think we don't treat criminals effectively. Let's say, at least in Western societies like Europe and the US, let's say. And we tend to overlook their intrinsic value as fellow humans. Now, there's a quote from the book The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which goes along the lines of, if anything does preserve society, even in our time, and does regenerate and transform the criminal, it is only the law of Christ speaking in his conscience. So what he's referring to here is that societies have the state, which imposes laws on its citizens, and if the citizens breach the law, then they are dealt with accordingly and they are sent to prison. But in order to preserve the peace in a society, it is actually the conscience of the individual which preserves it. It is not sending them to prison. Dostoevsky, or in this book, argues that you do not preserve peace in a society by sending them to prison. All you do is banish them and actually make space for a new criminal to take their place, and you do not teach the criminal to behave better, let's say. But it is actually something religious that lies within the individual that enables them to behave, or enables them to choose to behave ethically and lawfully. Now, this is what I will be continuing with in this video, is this idea that there is something godlike, something divine within the individual. Now, I think locking up criminals in prison for extended periods of time does not solve the problem. And the problem is that the individual acted unlawfully. So the aim, I think, here would be to have all individuals with a conscience, and a conscience is like something within the individual that helps them determine what is right and what is wrong, what is ethical and what is unethical. So you would want to spark that within the individual and make them, enable them to act upon their conscience. So their conscience would need to be nurtured and encouraged, and that's, I think, how you solve the problem better. How you do that, that's the question, but I think that is more effective than locking people up. And I think nowadays it doesn't happen when you get locked up, because you simply get locked up. I think I'm not sure if priests or religion is very present in prisons. I know there's some movies where they have like a priest who talks or teaches the inmates, like in A Clockwork Orange. In the movie, there's a priest who talks to the protagonist. Because that might be a way to spark the conscience, but without that, I don't really see how the criminals who enter the prison will leave with a better conscience. So what happens then? I think the outcome of locking people up is that you have an outcast, an unwanted individual in society. Because when you come back into society, you are not integrated, and you can mentally and physically deteriorate rapidly due to loneliness, for example, which is a vicious circle, because you are not integrated. Because you might go into society and start thinking, well, I'm unwanted, I'm a criminal, and you stamp yourself off then as an outcast. And then you don't want to go to social events because you think you're unwanted, and that is part of a vicious aspect of loneliness, in that you feel lonely, you feel like maybe people don't want to hang around me, and then you go to events or to situations where there's socializing, and there might be a little cue that somebody does, a little social cue, where, let's say, they're talking to you or a group of people, and then they go to somebody else, and you interpret it, you overinterpret it, and you inaccurately interpret it as they don't like you, and then you're unwanted, and then you say, actually, I'm not enjoying this event, I'm going to go home, when actually that person just needed to go to the bathroom or something. So it's this vicious internal, like, psychological cycle that occurs, which can really deteriorate, or make you deteriorate and become more lonely. And it's not just loneliness that I think criminals might face, but it's a feeling of being unwanted, and which is really uncomfortable and bad. So people in the society, I think, not the criminals, the integrated people, are almost like an extension of the punishment that the criminals receive, because the people in the society do not believe in the redemption of the criminal. They do not have the faith in the criminal, in the individual, that they can learn from their actions and they can transform into a civilized neighboring citizen. I'm not sure if they're impatient, the people in society, or they just can't be bothered. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think they don't give the criminal, let's say, a second chance, which they would probably need, which they would need. And this is because, this is where I'm going, proceeding with the concept of intrinsic value. So people in society don't give criminals a second chance because I think the knowledge that something is divine, there's intrinsic value within the individual, is absent in these people. They don't believe it. I don't think they believe it because, firstly, they're not taught it. And I suspect that in previous centuries, when Christianity was more prevalent, people did believe that humans had they had some sort of God within them, something divine within them, which is present in all individuals. And probably also because Jesus and God were depicted as in the form of a human, especially Jesus. Like, Jesus is the human representation of God. So there's a common theme that humans have God within them, and if we relate this back to Dostoevsky's quote that it is only the law of Christ speaking in his conscience, this is referring to that there is something divine within the individual that speaks to the individual's mind and sort of like directs or guides the individual. So this means that some sort of profound value must lie within the individual, because God is profound. The concept is divine, is a concept of divinity. And this intrinsic value lies within all humans, also criminals. But we don't really think like that. Hence, we simply box in these people that have behaved unlawfully and stamp them off as dead weight to society or outliers of society, when they, on average, probably are not. And they're actually, if you look at the crimes that were committed, the likelihood of you having been able to act out that crime is extremely high, I think, and you probably could have acted out even better. This is all because of our shadow archetype, which is a section of our psyche that sort of wants to wreak havoc and produce evil and hell, and that is present across all humans, and it's a part of our human nature. And if you think that these criminals are outliers, I think you are wrong. They were subjected to circumstances that enabled them to manifest this shadow archetypal behavior, but they are not much different to you, unless apart from individual outliers who have let's say unbalanced neurochemical composition, whatever that is, but like have disorders, like mental disorders, let's say, but those aren't in the majority. So, and there's this theme that keeps ringing in my mind, that you do not bash somebody who has bashed you in return. If somebody insults you, the noble thing would be to, or let's say the unnoble thing would be to bash them back, to insult them back. But that's just not what you do. That's not the ethical, it's not the noble thing, it's not the right thing to do. And it's not how you constructively respond to somebody's actions, because you don't solve the problem like that. If somebody insults you or is upset about something you did, you do not solve the issue at hand by insulting them back. It's just obvious, and you can think about that yourself. If somebody insults you, the first reaction you might have is to insult them back as a defense mechanism. But that doesn't get to the bottom of why they insulted you, the issue. And it is, I think, therefore good that murderers are not executed in Western societies usually, because that's not how you deal with a murderer accordingly. But I think that locking up people is also not constructive enough. You do not solve the problem, and you respond to their crime still with a relatively hard hand. We need to understand how this concept of intrinsic value within the human is extreme, but there's something in it. You need to understand how unbelievable it is to treat a criminal as if they still have intrinsic value despite their crimes. Like, you still give them the opportunity to be forgiven. That is amazing, literally. And most people that will not be the instinctual response to somebody like a murderer. You would not think, okay, let's give them a second chance. But there's something about that is right. Like, I think would be noble to give them a second chance. Of course, it is very different if somebody murders somebody in your close family. Like, it'll be a lot harder to say that still, for me especially. But I think there is, like, you would not want to perpetuate the idea of bashing criminals or bashing people for the actions they have done. That's just it's not the correct way to handle them. And I suspect that the reward you and society is given as a response to treating everybody as if they have intrinsic value would be profound. And if you were patient and took this leap of faith that all humans can be forgiven and can transform into better individuals, then there would be fewer outcasts, fewer crimes, and less suffering, perhaps. And this attitude of intrinsic value might seem naive, that everybody has intrinsic value. But I think if you understand the logic behind it and the literature from, let's say, the Bible and other stories, other like literature on human behavior, then you approach this attitude without naivety, yet still with the determination that humans have intrinsic value, and that perspective is correct and is noble and is ethical. So in conclusion, I think the act of locking up criminals without trying to spark their conscience is ineffective, because the criminal will re-enter society feeling unwanted, I think, and not being in a state where they are better or more able to ethically choose their behavior. And this attitude of bashing the criminal, or like dealing with them with a hard hand, overlooks their intrinsic value and is not it's not the noble thing to do, I think. Yeah. So I think if we try and adopt this attitude of treating individuals as if they have intrinsic value, and being patient with them and trying to nurture that intrinsic value, I think everybody would significantly benefit. And this is also connected with patience. Like, you treat yourself and the people around you with more respect then, and I think everybody would that would be an advantage for everybody. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about self-development, dating, and how to reduce suffering in life. Thank you for listening.